Welcome to Wild West Love Chronicles. Today I'm going to share a deeply touching and thrilling story. Let's listen closely. The Texas sky split open with heat. Dry winds scoured the plains like invisible claws, tugging dust into the air, coating every rock, bone, and forgotten trail with a veil of red. The land here didn't sing, it hissed. Rattlers in the brush, distant vultures circling overhead. The sun bled over the ridges like a wound that wouldn't close. Jonas McClary wiped his brow as his mule clopped beside him, its ears twitching at flies. He had been riding since dawn, heading east with furs and tobacco stuffed in a burlap sack. The path was familiar, carved shallow into the brittle earth by old wagon wheels and the footsteps of men long dead. He passed the same twisted trees, the same thirsty rocks, the same half-buried wagon axle that marked the halfway point to the trading post. But today, the wind changed. He noticed it first in the way his mule slowed. The beast grunted, hooves stomping nervously. Then came the smell, sour and coppery. Not animal, not something natural. Jonas slowed his step, narrowed his eyes toward the lone tree up ahead. A juniper, old and gnarled, bark curled like the skin of a burned man. And beneath it, or rather from it, hung something pale, limp, and swaying. He froze. The figure spun slowly in the wind. Long hair whipped in strands across a young girl's face. Her dress was torn and stiff with dried blood. Her bare feet pointed downward, toes purple, nails split. Around her throat, a rope had bitten deep into flesh, leaving a ring of red and blue like some grotesque necklace. Above her, nailed into the tree's bark with a rusted railroad spike, was a plank of wood etched in black paint. Indian land. Jonas stumbled back, bile rising in his throat. God Almighty! He didn't get closer, didn't touch the rope or try to cut it. He turned his mule and rode hard back toward the settlement, dust trailing behind him like smoke. Word traveled fast in these parts. By nightfall, every mouth in the town of Granger's Ford was murmuring about the hanging. A white girl, young, pretty, maybe, hung by savages, probably Comanche. Had to be. By the next morning, Captain Elijah Hale had called a meeting in the square. The same man who led Union men through Missouri now stood with a silver pistol at his hip and a scar across his chin, telling townsfolk that blood needed to answer blood. No name had been found for the girl. No family had claimed her, but she was theirs, one of their own, and someone, some red bastard, was going to pay for it. Miles away, far from the clamor of voices and spit-slick lies, Tokori stalked a deer across a ridge of sandstone in silence. His boots were soft-soled and wrapped in sinew. His bow, carved from mesquite and smoothed by years of sweat, sat quiet in his hand. The deer was close, no more than 30 paces, nose flicking the air. Tokori crouched, still as the bones of the land. He had hunted alone for years now. No brother, no tribe, no songs to guide him. Just breath, just wind. But the deer paused, ears twitching. It turned, snorted, and vanished in a blur of muscle into the scrub. Tokori didn't follow. Something else hung in the air. Not scent, not sound, but a weight, heavy, wrong, like thunder waiting behind the clouds. He turned slowly, eyes narrowing toward the trail below. He hadn't meant to cross the old trade path today, but now something pulled him there. The tree came into view from behind a curve of red stone. Even before he saw her, he felt it in his chest, like the ghost of a drumbeat long forgotten. She was smaller than he expected. The wind moved her body like a puppet's, slow and grotesque. Her skin was pale, tinged blue, her face swollen. The rope groaned under its burden, but her chest, barely, faintly, moved, alive. He stepped forward without thinking, bow dropped to his side. The smell was sharp, sweat, blood, and urine. Flies buzzed at her lips and ears. He reached up, placed one hand on her waist to steady her, and with the other he pulled a knife from his belt. The blade sliced clean through the rope. She fell into his arms, limp and heavier than she looked. Her breath rattled. Her head lolled against his shoulder. Lips cracked. He laid her down in the shadow of the tree, pressed 2 fingers to her throat. The pulse was faint. She wouldn't last long. He should have left her. Every part of him knew it. She was a settler's child. Blonde, blue-eyed, the same kind of face that watched soldiers cut his mother's throat when he was 10. He had no place dragging her back, no safety, no allies. If the settlers found him with her, he would hang next to that cursed tree. But he couldn't walk away. Not this time. Tokori wrapped her in his old buffalo hide cloak, lifted her onto his back, and began the long, silent walk into the canyons. He moved fast, taking game trails and cuts through stone that no horse could follow. She moaned once, then fell silent. Her weight was little more than a child's. Her heat, faint but there, pressed against his back. The sun bled lower. By nightfall, they reached a spring, one that bubbled from between slabs of limestone, hidden beneath a canopy of mesquite and cactus. Wild horses sometimes came here to drink. No white men, no soldiers, only stone and stars. He laid her beside the water and soaked a strip of cloth, pressing it to her lips. She flinched. Her eyes fluttered open, just barely. "Don't kill me," she rasped. Tokori didn't speak. He pressed the cloth again. She drank, and then she slept. That night, he built no fire. He sat beside her, listening to her breath. In the dark, with the cicadas humming and the stars burning overhead, he stared at the moon and remembered a time when the land was theirs, when his people rode free across it like wolves. That time was gone, and yet, somehow, this girl, this hanging ghost, had survived. Why? Who hung her? And what kind of men would leave her as bait for a war? By morning, she burned with fever. He chewed leaves of mescal root and spit them into a cloth, placing it on her forehead. He whispered in Comanche, not words for her, but for the spirits. He didn't know if they listened anymore. She slept through the day, coughing, mumbling, names, phrases, a whisper of "Papa once," and "Don't take me again." At dusk, her eyes opened longer. She looked at him and said nothing. He offered her water again. She drank it with trembling hands. The next morning she tried to speak, but her voice cracked into silence. He handed her a stick and scratched a line in the sand. She blinked. He gave her the stick. Slowly, shakily, she began to draw. First, a cross, then a house, then a man, tall with a hat, then 3 more men, then the tree. He watched her hands. She pointed at the man with the hat, then to herself, then to the tree. Not Comanche, not warriors, white men. His jaw clenched. Something deep in his chest stirred. Not rage. Not yet. But recognition. The kind of darkness he thought he'd left behind. She had been a pawn. A girl hung not by enemies, but by her own kind, offered up as a symbol. A lie meant to spark fire. He stood slowly. Wind shifted the brush. Somewhere beyond the canyon, a hawk screamed. Tokori looked down at her. Her eyes had closed again. Sleep or exhaustion, maybe both. He turned his face to the west, toward the town, toward the place where men with pale skin and dark hearts were likely planning their next move. And somewhere among them, one with a scar just beneath his eye. Tokori had seen scars like that in war. He remembered them well. The girl breathed, shallow but steady. He would watch over her now, and when the time came, he would walk into the fire. Not as a ghost, not as prey, but as the one who remembered what they all forgot, that some truths could only be buried for so long before the wind dug them back up, just like bones. The girl woke in darkness, and for a moment, she thought she was still hanging. Her body ached in ways that no scream could express. Her throat was raw, a deep, stinging trench where the rope had kissed skin. Her lips were dry, tongue thick. She coughed, and the sound that came out was wet and broken, like a boot through crushed leaves. Above her, moonlight laced through the canopy of crooked branches. Water trickled nearby, soft and rhythmic, like a lullaby for something ancient. The smell was different now. Earth, wild herbs, smoke, but faint. No blood, no rope, no piss-soaked cloth over her mouth. Just the night, and someone, breathing nearby. She turned her head slowly. Her vision swam. A shape sat beside her, still, unmoving, eyes catching the moonlight just enough to shine like twin stars. She froze, heart clawing at her ribs. He didn't speak, neither did she. Her eyes closed again, whether from fear or exhaustion, she couldn't say. When the light returned, it came in streaks of pale gold filtered through canyon rock. The heat pressed low against her skin, but not like before. She was shaded now, nestled beneath a half-shelter of bent branches and buffalo hide. Her throat itched, her fingers trembled. A bowl was set beside her. Clay. Rough. Full of something greenish and smelling like dirt. The man returned, silent as wind. He crouched, stirred the bowl with a flat piece of wood, then dipped his fingers and pressed the mixture to her throat. She flinched. His voice, when it came, was low and smooth. "Mescal root," he said. "It heals. Drink." She looked at him, fear swimming behind her eyes. He didn't smile, didn't soften, just lifted the bowl to her lips and tilted it gently. The taste was foul, bitter and thick, but she swallowed. After, he stepped away, giving her space. She watched him move. Everything about him seemed carved from shadow. His chest was bare beneath a faded leather vest. His hair was long, tied back with rawhide. His face was stoic, strong-jawed, eyes narrow. There was no war paint, no feathers, only a necklace of tiny bones and turquoise stones. She had heard tales of Comanche warriors as monsters, scalpers, baby killers, stories whispered by fires and passed between trembling hands. This man didn't match those stories. He looked like someone who had already seen the end of the world. She pointed to herself, lips barely moving. "Eee!" The sound cracked, useless. He reached into the dirt with a stick and drew a line. She took it. Her hand shook. She scratched her name slowly into the earth. Evelyn. He studied it for a moment, then gave a small nod, picked up his own stick, drew beneath it. Tokori. Their eyes met. Something passed between them. Not trust, not yet, but a truce. The next 2 days blurred. Tokori gathered herbs, brought water, cleaned her wounds. Evelyn drifted in and out, haunted by flashes. Her father's voice. Laughter round the fire. Men with faces like wolves. The scent of smoke. Rope tightening. That scarred man's smile as he said, "Let it swing." She tried to tell Tokori with shapes in the dirt. He understood more than she expected. She drew a square for a house, a cross for her father. Then, 4 men, one with a scar over his eye. She pointed to them, then to the tree. Tokori's jaw tightened. His hand curled slightly around the stick. Not Comanche. Not raiders. Whites. They had done this to her, hung her like bait, and carved the lie above her head. He said nothing, but the air changed around him, darkened. That night, Evelyn woke to him chanting under his breath beside the fire. A low, rhythmic pulse of words she didn't know. His eyes were closed. He was swaying slightly, rocking forward and back. She watched, heart caught in her throat. Not out of fear, but because for the first time since the rope, she didn't feel alone. She fell back asleep to the sound of his voice. The next morning her voice returned, just barely. "I was at the well," she whispered. He turned, listened. "I was fetching water. They came. 3 of them. I knew one. He worked with my father, the one with the scar." She paused. Her hand went to her throat. "They said it wouldn't hurt. Just a little scare. Then—" Her voice cracked again. Tokori handed her water. She drank. "They tied me up, took me to that tree. They were laughing. One said, 'They'll blame the savages. It'll get them moving.'" Her face twisted. I didn't understand at first, not until the rope was around my neck. Then I knew. I begged, I kicked, and they pulled. She broke, covered her face. Her shoulders shook, but no sound came out. Tokori stared into the fire, jaw tight. He had seen cruelty before. But this? This was something else. This was ceremony, engineered hatred. A message written in blood, not for war, but for power. She lay curled for hours after that, silent. He watched over her, sharpening his knife slowly. No rage in his motions, just focus. At dusk, he took her hand and placed a stone in it, rough, warm from the sun. "What's this?" she rasped. He placed a second in his own palm, held it up. "When the wind comes," he said, "the stone remembers its place." She blinked. He placed both stones beside each other, pressed them into the dirt. He wasn't just healing her. He was showing her she was still part of the land, still real, still seen. The next day she walked, barely, with his help, down to the spring. She washed herself as he stood with his back turned. She didn't ask for privacy. He didn't need to be told. Later, as they sat by the fire, she asked, "Why did you help me?" He stared into the flames for a long while, then finally said, "Because no one helped mine." She didn't ask more. He told her about his village, burned when he was 13. The bluecoats came with torches and laughter. They killed his brother first. His mother screamed. His father fought until he was riddled with bullets. He ran, hid, survived. But something in him died that day. "I walk between," he said. "Not white, not Comanche, just shadow." Evelyn looked at him differently after that, not as a savage, not as a man, but as something elemental, like the wind, like the stone. That night, they heard riders in the distance, far off, maybe a patrol. Tokori doused the fire. They sat in silence, listening to hoofbeats fade. "I should go home," she said quietly. "But I can't, not yet. If they see me," he nodded. "They think you're dead. You stay dead." She looked at him. "Until we tell the truth." She said nothing more. The next day, he taught her how to move without leaving prints, how to break twigs in a pattern that meant, "I am here." She learned quickly, like she had been waiting her whole life for something real to hold on to. At night, she stopped trembling. She dreamed less of rope and more of stars. But on the fourth day, they found tracks near the spring. Boot prints. 3 men. Tokori's face darkened. "They're looking," he said. She clutched her shawl. "For me?" "No. For silence. To keep it." She looked toward the east. "Then we need to go west." He shook his head. "You're not ready. I won't get stronger hiding." He saw fire in her eyes. Not the same as his, but close. That night, as the moon rose, they packed what little they had. Water. Herbs. A crude sling for her still healing arm. He gave her a stone knife and showed her how to grip it. Then, together, they walked into the dark. Toward the town. Toward the ones who hung her. Toward the truth. And though neither spoke it aloud, both knew there would be no turning back. They moved by moonlight, 2 shadows sliding between the ribs of the land. Evelyn's breath came hard through her nose, her voice still torn to ribbons inside her throat. But she didn't complain. Tokori watched her with sidelong glances, each step testing how far she could go. Her feet were wrapped in cloth and worn buckskin, her dress tied with rope to keep it from dragging. She held a stick in one hand, mostly for balance, and the stone knife he had given her in the other. He had offered to carry her more than once, but each time she shook her head, jaw clenched. She was no longer the girl hanging from the tree. The wind had shifted since they left the canyon, blowing harder from the north, sharp with ash. By the second night, they passed through a dry wash where the remains of an old Comanche camp lay scattered, arrowheads buried in the dust, rusted kettles overturned beside fire pits long cold. Evelyn paused to touch one of the old stones, fingers brushing a smoothed edge where fire had licked it. She looked at Tokori, questions swimming in her face, but didn't speak. He simply looked away and kept walking. The world out here wasn't meant for questions. On the third day, they reached the ridge overlooking Granger's Ford. From up high, the town looked small, just clusters of wood and smoke, all built too close to the river like the people thought water made them safe. Evelyn sat with her knees pulled to her chest, watching men in brown coats moving between the buildings. Tokori crouched beside her, hand shielding his eyes from the sun. She recognized one of them. "There," she whispered. "See the man with the hat? Wide brim, leather. That's him. That's the one with the scar." Tokori nodded slowly. "Creighton. You know him. He buys land. Buys men, too. He built that sign they hung you under." Her fists clenched. "He said I'd be doing something noble. That they'd only leave me there a few minutes. Just enough to scare folks. He said it'd help move things along. That the Comanche would be blamed, and the army would come clean them out." She looked at him, pain breaking across her face. "I didn't believe him, but I didn't scream either. I didn't fight until it was too late." "You didn't know," Tokori said. "But I let them put the rope around me." He said nothing for a while. Then, softly, "Sometimes the knife is handed to us with kind words. That doesn't make us the ones who carved the wound." Below, a group of men led horses from a stable. Their rifles glinted in the sun. One of them waved toward the hills. "They're preparing," she said. "For war," Tokori answered. "They think they have cause now. A girl killed. A message written in blood. That's how they get permission." "They won't stop," Evelyn said. "Even if we show them the truth. Even if we say who did it. They won't care." Tokori nodded once. "Some won't. But others might." She looked at him sideways. "So what do we do?" He rose, eyes fixed on the scarred man walking back into the saloon. "We give them something they can't ignore." That night, they crept closer to town, skirting the edge of the river where frogs croaked and reeds hissed. They slept in an old barn half collapsed under the weight of time. Mice scattered through the hay, and rain tapped lightly against the splintered wood overhead. Evelyn stared into the dark. "When I was a girl," she whispered, "my father told me God didn't see color, that the Lord made all men and women in his image. But then the war came, and he buried his cross and picked up a rifle. He said he was protecting his family, but he stopped seeing people. He only saw sides. I think that's what kills us." Tokori lay beside her, arms crossed over his chest. He didn't reply. But he understood, more than she knew. They rose before dawn and slipped through the edge of town like ghosts. The streets were quiet, but soldiers were beginning to arrive. She saw blue coats, dirty and worn, tying up horses and lighting cigars beneath porch awnings. Tokori led her through the back alleyways until they reached the church. It stood like a sentinel, tall and pale against the morning sky. Its bell had long stopped ringing for anything but funerals. Inside, the pews were empty, the altar covered in dust. Evelyn ran her fingers along the wood, breathing in the scent of old incense and ash. Her father's Bible had once lived here. She didn't know if it still did. Tokori found candles, lit 3, and placed them in a triangle. He murmured in his own tongue, not a prayer, exactly. Not anymore. Then he said, "We go to the square. You speak. They'll shoot you. Then I will bleed where everyone can see. I don't want you to die." He looked at her with a strange softness. "Neither do I. But dying is not the same as being silent." Outside, the square was beginning to fill. Captain Hale stood near the well, flanked by 2 lieutenants. Creighton paced beside him, gesturing wildly. Townsfolk gathered, most of them armed. A wagon rolled in from the south, carrying crates of ammunition. The words being spoken weren't casual. They were sharp, short, heavy. Tokori stepped into the light. A murmur swept through the crowd. Guns rose. But then Evelyn walked beside him, and the world seemed to stop. Her hair was dirty, her dress torn, her face pale but strong. The purple bruises along her throat spoke louder than any words could. She stepped forward, trembling but unbroken. Captain Hale's mouth opened. "What in God's name?" "She's alive?" someone whispered. Creighton's face turned white. "She was left to die," Tokori said. "But she lived, and she remembers." Hale stepped forward. "Evelyn Harrow? That's you, ain't it?" She nodded. He looked past her to Tokori, finger twitching on his pistol. "Did he take you?" "No," she said, her voice hoarse but clear. "He saved me." Louder now, to the crowd. "He saved me when your own men left me hanging." The crowd rippled. Uneasy. Watching Creighton, Evelyn pointed a shaking finger. "That man, Mason Creighton. He and 2 others dragged me from my home. They tied me up. They put that sign above me. They said it would stir the town. Make you angry. That you'd burn the Comanche out if you believed it was them." Lies crumbled like ash in Creighton's mouth. He reached for his sidearm, but Tokori was faster. He had no gun, only a throwing knife, but it flew true, embedding in the wooden post beside Creighton's hand. The message was enough. Soldiers closed in. Creighton tried to run. Hale barked orders. The scarred man was taken down, screaming about land, about power, about doing what needed to be done. But no one heard him anymore. They were looking at Evelyn. And at Tokori. People didn't cheer. Not all. Some looked away, ashamed. Some muttered and walked off. But the anger had cracked. The story, the lie, had split open for all to see. The girl had lived. And the savage they feared had saved her. That night, the fires were not celebratory. No feasting, no dancing, just a town slowly sitting with the weight of what it almost became. Evelyn stood outside the old church, wind pulling at her dress. Tokori was ready to leave. "You could stay," she said. "They won't have me." "I would." He gave a faint smile, rare and worn. "You are not the town." She looked down, lips trembling. "Will I see you again?" He didn't answer. Instead, he placed something in her palm. A stone. She closed her fingers around it. "What does it mean?" "That you remember where you stood when the wind changed." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. Then Tokori turned and walked into the dark, the sound of horses and smoke fading behind him. The night swallowed him whole. And the land, once again, was quiet. The town didn't sleep that night. Even when the torches were doused and the horses stabled, the air remained tight, like a drum pulled too taut. People lay in their beds, staring at walls. Fathers kept rifles near their doors. Mothers rocked children who'd heard too much. Somewhere, someone wept alone. Somewhere else, someone sharpened a blade. There were no parades, no sermons of thanks, only silence, and the long, slow unwinding of a lie that had nearly set the world on fire. The lie was dying, but the smoke still lingered. Evelyn sat alone in the old church, where the moon spilled across the warped floorboards like a quiet ghost. Her fingers ran along the edge of the Bible her father once preached from. It sat beneath the pulpit still, untouched for over a year, its leather cracked, its corners curling like dry leaves. She opened it slowly and found, between the pages of Psalms, a small folded note. Her father's writing. "Even if you're afraid, do right." That was all it said. She didn't cry. Not then. Her eyes had burned too much already. She folded it again, pressed it flat, and tucked it into the pocket of her dress. The stone Tokori had given her sat heavy in her other hand, smooth, warm from her touch. She didn't know if she'd ever see him again. She didn't know if she wanted to. The next morning, the gallows were taken down. Not by order, not by ceremony, just by quiet hands. A group of townsmen, including the blacksmith, the carpenter, and 2 widows, worked through the sunrise, breaking the beams, hauling the wood to the riverbank. No one asked where the girl had been hung. No one wanted to see the tree. The 3 men who had helped Creighton vanished that same morning. One was found miles south, trying to trade his boots for passage into Mexico. Another was shot dead by a rancher's son who claimed he knew the truth. The third disappeared without a trace. Rumor said wolves took him. But no one really believed that. Wolves don't bury their kills. Creighton remained in the jail, guarded by 2 bluecoats, with nerves made of tobacco and old scars. He didn't shout. He didn't protest, just stared out the bars with eyes that no longer blinked as often as they should. He'd stopped talking the moment Evelyn finished her last sentence in the square. His silence wasn't guilt. It was hate calcifying into something colder. By midday, soldiers began packing up. Hale gave no orders to burn Comanche lands. There would be no march. No cleansing. Not this time. He didn't address the town again, didn't apologize. He simply stood on the porch of the general store for a full hour, smoking a cigar down to the butt, watching the horizon, with a look like he knew how close they'd come to turning into something monstrous. The townsfolk didn't celebrate. They got back to work, repaired fences, milked cows, hauled water, pretended that what happened wasn't written behind every glance, but it was. It always would be. That evening, Evelyn left. She didn't tell anyone, didn't leave a note, didn't wait to be stopped. She took her father's Bible, the stone, and a bag of bread wrapped in cloth. No saddle, just a mule, borrowed from the church barn, whose ears twitched like it already knew where she was going. She rode west. She didn't know if Tokori would be there, but the canyon remembered. 3 days passed before she reached the spring. The sky had darkened by then, a storm curling across the mesa like spilled ink. Lightning walked the horizon. She found the camp empty but intact, stones still stacked in the fire ring, the hide stretched between branches, the old herbs drying under the ledge. She sat beneath the overhang and waited. Rain came slow at first, then harder, thudding into the dust and washing the scent of old sweat and blood into the roots of the land. She stayed dry beneath the rock. The mule shifted restlessly beside her, head bowed. When the storm passed, the canyon sang again. She waited another day. On the 3rd night, he came. Not on horseback, not by trail. Just appeared, silent as smoke, slipping between shadows, like they were doors made just for him. She didn't speak. Neither did he. He sat across from her, watched her build the fire, watched her eat, watched her place the stone between them like a bridge. "I thought you might be gone for good," she finally said. "I was." "What brought you back?" He stared at the fire, face unreadable. "I saw a hawk with a broken wing still flying. I thought maybe the wind had changed." She nodded. "I couldn't stay there," she said. "I couldn't keep pretending that everything ended just because the talking stopped." "Talking never stopped," he said. "It just got quieter. Meaner." She looked at him. "You've seen that before." He didn't deny it. "I want to do something," she said. "Something more than just survive it." His eyes met hers. "And what would you do?" "Tell the truth," she said. Out loud. Again and again, until someone listens. He leaned back, arms folded. "Words are fragile. So are bones," she said. "But they heal stronger if you set them right." He smiled, the faintest twitch of his mouth. "You sound like your father." "I sound like myself." They stayed in the canyon for 2 more days. Long enough to gather roots. To let the mule rest. Long enough for the bruises on her arms to fade from black to yellow. Long enough to watch a pair of foxes drink from the spring, their eyes glowing silver in the dark. On the morning of the 5th day, Evelyn wrapped the hide tent and tied it to the mule. Tokori stood with his bow across his back, silent. "You coming?" she asked. "Where?" "Where the silence is thickest." He didn't answer, but he walked beside her as she led the mule eastward. They stopped in small towns, places where word hadn't reached. She spoke in churches, in schoolhouses, at water pumps and train depots. She showed the scars, told the names, named the lie. Some listened, some didn't. Once, a man threw a rock at her head. Tokori knocked him out cold with a single punch, then helped Evelyn back onto her feet before she could even finish the sentence she was trying to say. They kept moving. By the time winter kissed the land with frost, she had spoken in 11 towns. Some printed her words in leaflets. Some laughed her off as mad. One man tried to arrest her for disturbing public harmony. She quoted scripture to his face. Tokori never left her side, not as a bodyguard, not as a savior, but as someone who knew the fire that lived in a person who refused to be silent. They weren't looking for war, they were looking for light. Something to burn through the thick, choking fog that fear had left behind. And in every town, someone stayed after to speak with her. Quiet people. Young girls. Widows. A few half-blood children with names they never used out loud. People who remembered what it meant to be afraid and finally saw someone standing where they couldn't. Evelyn never called herself a prophet. Tokori never called himself anything at all. But together, they carried the story farther than either could have alone. One evening, as they sat beside a fire in an abandoned stagecoach depot, she looked across the flames and asked, "What do you think happens when we run out of places to tell it?" Tokori threw a stick into the fire. Sparks climbed into the night like lost prayers. "Then we go where the echoes carry." "Where's that?" He pointed toward the hills. "Where the wind remembers." And she believed him. She always would. Winter arrived without asking. It swept down from the north with silver teeth and silence, draping the land in white breath and brittle frost. Streams froze in their beds. Trees stood naked against the sky. The roads vanished beneath pale dust, and the sun, when it rose, did so like an old man peering through a cracked window. But Evelyn rode through it all. She had no map, no destination, just a trail of towns behind her and a fire inside her bones that refused to go out. Her voice had returned, not as it was before, but stronger, shaped by scar tissue and memory. It rasped now, and sometimes cracked, but when she spoke, people listened. And when she paused, they remembered the silence that nearly buried her. Tokori kept his distance more and more. Not in steps. He still walked beside her, hunted for her, tended the fire at night, but in spirit, he'd grown quieter, more watchful. She could feel it in the way he stared at the stars, like he was listening for something she couldn't hear. A call, pulling at the thread of his soul. The longer they walked, the more he seemed to drift, not away from her, but toward something older, deeper, that she couldn't follow. They stopped in a village near the Colorado line in early December, just a cluster of cabins and 2 crooked streets that leaned against the wind. The preacher there had only one arm, and the church doubled as a schoolhouse. Evelyn spoke there after supper, her voice echoing off the cracked wooden walls while frost clung to the windows like ghosts trying to get in. She told the story again, how 3 men hanged her, how a Comanche warrior saved her, and how the real danger wasn't across the river or in feathers, but in the hearts of men who would use a girl's death to buy land. When she finished, a boy of no more than 10 stood up and asked, "Did it hurt?" The room went silent. Evelyn looked at him. His hands were dirty and his nose red from cold. He wasn't mocking. He wasn't cruel. He was just trying to understand something bigger than himself. She knelt beside him and took his hand. "Yes," she said. But the pain wasn't the rope. It was knowing that people would believe the lie because it was easier than facing the truth. The boy nodded. He didn't let go of her hand for a long time. That night, as snow began to fall, Tokori stood at the edge of the woods staring west. She approached quietly, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "You're leaving," she said. He didn't turn. "Soon. Where?" "Home." She almost laughed. You told me you didn't have one." "I didn't," he said. "But I think maybe it's still waiting." The snow caught in his hair like dust. He looked older in that light. Not aged. Eternal. "Will you come back?" she asked. He finally turned to face her. "I was never meant to stay." She looked down. Her fingers found the stone in her coat pocket, the one he had given her beneath the tree. It had warmed over the months from her body heat, smooth and worn at the edges now. She pressed it into his palm. "This was yours." He closed his hand around it and held it to his chest. "Now, it's both of ours." That night, they didn't sleep. They sat beside the fire and watched it burn to embers. She rested her head on his shoulder, and he didn't move. When the morning came, he was gone. He didn't leave a note. He didn't need to. She stood alone beside the ashes of the fire and watched the sun rise. It was a quiet, cold sun, but it was honest. And for the first time in months, she didn't feel the rope on her neck. She just felt the wind on her face. Time passed like a river through a canyon, slow, steady, unchanging, but always moving. Spring came, soft-footed and green. Evelyn found herself staying longer in each place, teaching children, helping build fences, reading scripture in voices, still learning to trust again. She still told her story, but less often now. The words had done their work. The truth had its roots, and in some towns, people already knew. They would nod before she even opened her mouth. One man offered her a room in exchange for helping tend his dying wife. She stayed a week. The woman passed, holding Evelyn's hand. One night, weeks later, she dreamed of the tree. But in the dream, the rope was cut. The sign was burned. And beneath the branches stood a young Comanche boy and a white girl, neither speaking, just watching the sky together. When she woke, her chest didn't ache the way it used to. By the time the second winter rolled around, the stories of Granger's Ford had changed. They didn't speak of the hanging anymore. They spoke of the girl who walked from town to town, telling truths and healing silence. Some said she rode with a ghost. Some said she was one. A man in Evelyn wrote about her in a local paper, called her the rope walker, claimed she bridged the space between two worlds, that she bore the weight of history like a scar and left peace in her wake. He never met her, but the words reached people. Evelyn read them once, sitting on a porch with a mug of tea and a shawl wrapped around her knees. She smiled, folded the page, and lit it on fire. She didn't need stories. She had the truth. And somewhere out there, she believed, Tokori still walked. Sometimes, when the night was still, she'd hear a rustle beyond the firelight, the snap of a twig, the slow rhythm of a footstep through leaves. She'd look up, expecting to see him, but he never came. Until one summer morning, she was standing in the field behind the church, gathering wildflowers for the children's lessons. The air was heavy with heat, and dragonflies danced through the air like sparks. A shadow moved behind her. She turned. He stood at the edge of the field, a feather tucked into his braid and a thin leather string around his wrist. He didn't speak. Neither did she. She walked to him and stood before him. He reached out and placed something in her hand, a stone, but not the one she had given him, a new one, darker, heavier. She looked up at him. "This one?" she asked. He nodded. "So, you remember where you stood when the world changed." She closed her fingers around it and pressed it to her chest. "Will you stay this time?" He looked past her, toward the hills. The church bell rang behind them. "No," he said, "but I will walk near." She smiled, and for a long while they just stood there, side by side, as the wind blew through the grass, carrying with it the dust of old stories and the scent of new ones waiting to be born. In time, the hanging tree withered and fell. Storms broke its spine, and the wood rotted, but the roots remained, deep, hidden. And Evelyn Harrow, the girl who was meant to be a symbol of war, became something else entirely. A witness, a bridge. a fire that would not go out. The world didn't change overnight. It never does, but in the years that followed, in the spaces between one town and the next, in the hush after the telling of a hard truth, someone would always whisper, "There was a girl, and a warrior, and a story they carried that cut through the darkness like a blade." And the wind would carry that story onward, like a promise, like a warning, like a stone pressed into your hand, reminding you exactly where you stood when the world asked who you were. And so, from the silence of a noose to the strength of a voice, Evelyn Harrow's story reminds us that truth doesn't die when it's buried. It waits to be spoken. And sometimes, all it takes is one unlikely soul to cut the rope and let the truth breathe again. If this story moved you, Wild West Love Chronicles is where history meets heart, where every frontier tale is stitched with courage, scars, and unbreakable human spirit. Subscribe now and ride with us through more untold legends of love, survival, and redemption across the dust-blown lands of the Wild West. You won't want to miss what comes next.